domestic energy for Iran's civilian population, Tehran retaliated, striking Qatar's Ras Laffan processing plant, part of the biggest natural gas field in the world. Overnight, before greeting the Japanese Prime Minister at the White House, the president had already criticized Israel's actions, saying he'd known nothing about the targeting of civilian energy infrastructure, and Israel wouldn't do it again.
You talked to Prime Minister Netanyahu about attacking the oil and gas fields.
Yeah, I did. I told him don't do that, and he won't do that. We didn't discuss. You know, we do. We're independent. We get along great. It's coordinated, but on occasion he'll do something, and if I don't like it, and so we're not doing that anymore.
And then an extraordinary historical slap in the face for Japan, when one Japanese reporter asked why allies hadn't been warned about the start of the war.
Who knows better about surprise than Japan? Okay, why didn't you tell me about Pearl Harbor? Okay, right?
Israel continues to face drone and missile strikes from Iran, the latest to get through, hitting a critical oil refinery in the port city of Haifa. President Trump started this war of choice because he said Iran's nuclear program posed an imminent threat to the United States. Administration officials went out of their way to say they weren't targeting Iran's energy infrastructure. But questions have loomed over diverging war aims, with Israel's focus on assassinations and this latest attack on the gas field. Earlier at the Pentagon, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said there was no timeline for the ending of the war, but appeared to acknowledge Israel's aims might differ.
We hold the cards. We have objectives. Those objectives are clear. We have allies pursuing objectives as well. And the truth speaks for itself. I mean, President Trump was very clear about that.
At the beginning of the day, Israeli officials had insisted that Iran's South Pars gas field wasn't just a civilian facility, but also used for military purposes and therefore a legitimate target. Come the end of the day, and the tone from the Prime Minister was markedly different.
Well, I'll say two things. Fact number one, Israel acted alone against the Slawiya gas compound. Fact number two, President Trump asked us to hold off on future attacks, and we're holding out.
Late afternoon at RAF Fairford in Gloucestershire, and US B-52 bombers are on their way for their latest mission. No clear view yet how long this conflict will last and what will bring it to an end. Gary O'Donoghue, BBC News, Washington.
Well, the attacks on the energy infrastructure in Iran and the Gulf have caused oil and gas prices to surge around the world. The cost of gas for the UK is now double what it was before the war, and there are warnings that inflation is likely to rise again. The Bank of England left interest rates unchanged today at 3.75%. Here's our economics editor, Faisal Islam.
Terminals, refineries and tankers targeted. The shockwaves hitting prices already. Some of the world's most important gas and oil facilities lying in ruins. The global economy staring into the abyss. And so this morning, global gas and oil prices exploded too.
This is what that looked like for the UK. Even though not much gas comes from Qatar and none at all comes from Iran, physically, the shockwaves affect the market prices. And you can see there, up it goes, enough to add £20 to £30 a month to typical bills if it sustains, but not as much as we saw back in 2022 during the painful Ukraine energy shock. Likewise with oil too. Up it goes there at the end, and this time it's a bit closer to what we saw in 2022. This is the UK Brent oil price. In some Asian markets, we're already seeing $170 for a barrel. And then there are all the other commodities affected. Urea, important for fertiliser, jet fuel at record levels, wheat, aluminium, steel too, some of it trapped in the Straits of Hormuz on ships, others byproducts of oil and gas. So not yet a full-blown energy shock, but it is pretty shocking.
A wave of inflation washing up here and everywhere, and that is most acutely seen here at the Bank of England.
I mean, we could be looking at 4 or 5% inflation.
Well, I don't think I'm not going to speculate on that. You're correct that we are now looking at a path of inflation which is not the one we were looking at. At the last meeting, where I said I thought it would come down to target by May. I'm afraid that's not going to happen. But we're not in the position we were in a few years ago because the backdrop to this is different. But it is a very volatile situation. the best and most appropriate solution to this problem is not monetary policy, it's to reopen the Strait of Hormuz.
Up until this Iran war, there was every expectation that today the Bank of England would have cut interest rates. That has not happened, a unanimous hold, and even some talk that if the conflict persists, that rates might have to go up. This uncertainty is feeding into markets for government borrowing, and so also fixed-rate mortgages with astonishing speed.
Certainly people are panic buying mortgages, which in one hand is probably the worst thing to do because that encourages lenders to increase their rates. We noticed last week that the lender offering the most competitive 2-year fixed rate was at 3.9%. Within 24 hours, because demand was exceeding their expectations, that rate went up to 4.2%. A further 24 hours later is now doing a 2-year fixed rate at 4.6%.
Talk of multiple rate rises was played down by the bank. It all just depends on events, blockades and infernos a long, long way from home. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
Well, at that news conference a little earlier, Israel's Prime Minister denied that he had dragged America into the war with Iran. He outlined Israel's goals, removing the nuclear and ballistic missile threat and creating the conditions for Iranian people to grasp their freedom. Let's get more on that from Lucy Williamson in Jerusalem tonight. And your assessment of everything we heard there from Benjamin Netanyahu, Lucy.
Well, the Israeli Prime Minister was again very keen to send the message of mission accomplished when it came to the war in Iran. He said Iran could no longer enrich uranium, could no longer produce ballistic missiles. But of course, Iran still has its stockpile of highly enriched uranium. The regime is still standing. And I can tell you that since that press conference ended, we have had 4 sets of alerts here in Jerusalem and heard 4 sets of interceptions overhead, warning of missiles incoming. It's no secret that Benjamin Netanyahu would like to see regime change in Iran, and that's something he was asked about tonight.
It is often said that you can't do revolutions from the air. That is true. You can't do it only from the air. You can do a lot of things from the air, and we're doing, but there has to be a ground component as well. There are many possibilities for this ground component, and I take the liberty of not sharing with you all those possibilities.
Well, there's been widespread speculation that Israel's deep intelligence on the ground in Iran may be used to support the opposition against the regime. Benjamin Netanyahu said tonight there were signs the regime was cracking and that if it survived, it would be weakened. But there are others who say the danger is the regime, if it survives, would be more determined and more hardline.
Lucy, thank you very much. Take care. Lucy Williamson there in Jerusalem. Iranian media reporting fresh attacks on Tehran tonight. Our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, is here in the studio with me. And we heard it there again. Benjamin Netanyahu talking about regime change. Really, what are the prospects, Lise?
He's been talking about that for a very long time. He talked about it last year during the June war. He's talked about it again. Recently, he expressed some uncertainty as to whether or not it could happen, or at least any time soon. And it's really hard, Jane, right now to have any real clarity about what's happening on the ground. But what we can say is that so far, there are no signs of surrender, no signs of even any cracks, and certainly not collapse. He talks about creating the conditions. So what has Israel been doing so far? In the last week, it has assassinated all of the top commanders and officials who were responsible for crushing the protests in January and many waves of protests since then. But as Lucy hinted, the people who replaced them were waiting in the wings. They are less experienced, they are more hardline, and now, after what's happened in this war, driven by revenge. What else?